Welcome to Bite by Bite Nutrition for Life, a broadcast of Purdue University Extension, where we cut through the hype, explore the science behind food and nutrition, and provide practical tips for incorporating healthful strategies into everyday life. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bite by Bite Nutrition for Life. My name is Tanya Short, and I am joined by my co-host, Monica Nagel. We are both health and human sciences educators with Purdue Extension. If you aren't familiar with Purdue Extension, go ahead and ask Professor Google about Purdue Extension and see what we're all about. As for this podcast, we are all about understanding and demystifying some of the complex or confusing information that consumers may be receiving about food, nutrition, and their health. Today, we are joined to have two guests with us to help understand alternative foods. By food alternatives or alternative foods, I'm referring to products like soy or almond milk that is meant to replace dairy, or plant-based protein products that are meant to be a substitute for meat in our diets. So let's go ahead and introduce our guests. Today we are joined by Hannah Kelly. Hannah is the Director of Health and Wellness for the American Dairy Association, Indiana, and she provides science-based nutrition information to healthcare providers, schools, media, and the community. Also with us is Amy Cifelli. Amy is the Associate Director of Nutrition Research at the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. It is important to note that both of our guests are registered dietitians, so these individuals are not just marketing for their respective positions, but individuals who are able to understand and interpret the science of nutrition and health. So welcome, Amy and Hannah. I don't know if you would like to add a little bit more about yourself, personally or professionally, to give folks a little bit of background in you and where you're coming from in this conversation.
Absolutely. This is Hannah. I am a registered dietitian, as was mentioned, and I've worked in a variety of areas, but about 6 years ago, I decided I wanted to get myself a little bit closer to my agricultural roots because I did have family who farmed for many years, and like most people, I was even more curious about where my food was coming from and the choices that I might make at the grocery store, questions from family and friends besides clients. And I've always just really enjoyed dairy foods, so it was a very easy fit for me to eventually come to work for dairy because there was so much science and research that was there that I felt very comfortable in being able to talk about those food products to people, and then in turn being able to bring in that agricultural piece. So it's just really been a lot of fun to be able to do this and meet so many great people and answer questions.
Perfect. I love that. So the marriage of agriculture and nutrition, because you can't have one without the other, right?
Right.
What about you, Amy? Can you share a bit?
Sure. Hi. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a guest today. My name is Amy Cifelli, and I'm a registered dietitian and also a mom to 3 kids. I say that because that influences a lot of, the way I think about things. I've worked for National Cattlemen's Beef Association for 10 years now. I was actually first introduced to NCBA while working in Dr. Penny Chris Etherton's lab at Penn State University. At that time, I led her Metabolic Diet Study Center lab, where the BOLD study, which the acronym stands for Beef in an Optimal Lean Diet, was conducted. And BOLD was a controlled feeding study that essentially showed that beef can be part of a heart-healthy DASH-style diet, rich in fruits, vegetables, and dairy. And it showed, beef can be also a heart-healthy food. For me personally, I did not grow up in agriculture. So during my tenure here with NCBA, I've learned so much about beef production practices, and a lot about, the work that beef farmers and ranchers do in this role. And for me, I'm a true believer that real foods like beef are the building blocks of high quality, healthy diets. And I believe that eating healthy, balanced diets are key contributors to our good health. And they're also one of the elements of our health that we personally, each one of us, can control, along with physical activity and sleep habits. So one of my key messages when I'm talking to folks is that we need to make healthy diets one of our main priorities, and we need to make time to think about, plan, purchase, prepare healthy foods and meals. And I like, in my role, I like to help people with that.
Yeah, I read somewhere once where we make approximately 200 nutrition decisions per day. So there is a lot of thought, whether we realize it or not, that goes into our food, right? And what we put on our table. So, as I said earlier, today we are talking about alternative foods or traditional food replacements, if you will. In both the cases we are talking about today, we are specifically talking about plant-based alternatives for products that traditionally come from animal sources. So the myth or trend that we want to examine is whether plant-based alternatives are really quote unquote better. Because as we've alluded to already just in our intro, there's a lot of ways we can define what better means, and it's going to be unique for each person. But let's jump straight into the nutrition since we've got a team of registered dietitians here. Let's start with you, Hannah. When we're thinking about traditional dairy and dairy alternatives, what is the difference nutritionally? Can you tell consumers what they're looking at when they compare these products?
Oh, absolutely. And it varies. It really varies depending on the product that they may be choosing to compare. So if a consumer or somebody is looking at cow's milk, for instance, for their dairy nutrition, there is a nutrition facts label on the back for them to be able to see. And maybe they're comparing it to soy or maybe almond or maybe oat milk, or there's so many alternatives out there. They really want to be very conscientious because they are not the same. I caution a couple of different things. First of all, make sure that they read the nutrition facts labels so that they can see it. For instance, there's 13 essential nutrients in cow's milk that we can consume, but there are not necessarily those same 13 nutrients in soy or almond or any of the other alternative products. Now, they sometimes come close. For instance, protein, there's 9 grams in 8-ounce serving of milk. There's 8 grams in soy, but there's only 1 gram in almond. So if somebody were looking at that product, trying to find one that's going to be providing them with more protein for the day, as a dietitian, I would tell them they should drink their milk or maybe eat the almonds, but don't consume almond alternative beverage because it does not contain the same amount of protein. And the same can be said for a variety of other things. If a consumer is looking for something is more, and I don't love the term, but I hear it out there, natural, in air quotes, different products contain different things naturally. So again, cow's milk naturally has calcium in it. It's fortified in those other beverages, which maybe that doesn't matter to a different consumer, and that's fine. It's all about choices, but being very aware that the nutritional values between them are very different. So you want to monitor that as a part of your entire daily meal plan.
Very well put. So it really depends. Read the label, right? I mean, we preach that a lot. And what's your goal? So Amy, kind of the same question for you regarding beef. Can you speak a little bit about the nutritional profile or the nutritional quality of beef components versus plant-based meat alternatives?
Yes, absolutely. From a beef perspective, I've learned a lot as a dietitian working for beef, but I've found that animal proteins like beef are actually among the most nutrient dense and complete protein sources available. Meaning, these foods provide all the essential amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein. And protein, as a registered dietitian, we know, but maybe not everybody does, protein is a nutrient that helps our body grow and develop and also repair and maintain muscle. So beef in particular has a unique nutrient matrix supplying 10 essential nutrients at 10% or higher of their daily value per 1 3-ounce cooked serving. So these essential nutrients include protein, zinc, and iron in their more bioavailable forms, along with B vitamins like B12, B6, niacin, riboflavin. And compared to the plant-based alternatives, they come along with beef has no added sodium and no long list of ingredients. So for about 170 calories per 3-ounce cooked serving, beef is really a nutrient-dense, power-packed protein and really sounds kind of trite to say, but it really gives you a lot of bang for your buck for your calories, and we're trying to be mindful of, trying to pack as much nutrition into each bite as we are. These plant-based alternative burgers, they're more food formulated products. And while their nutrition facts labels may look similar, they aren't actually nutritionally equivalent to beef or other meat products. For example, when we look at the nutrition facts panel, they may contain a similar number of calories or protein or fat per serving, but they're not truly nutritionally interchangeable when taking into account all of the nutritional components beyond simply nutrients. And there was an interesting study that was just published from the Duke University researcher Stefan Van Vliet. And in this study, and maybe I can send you the link for the show notes or something, the researchers examined whether plant-based alternatives mimic real, whole, natural foods like beef. And in this new research, along with a lot of emerging research, because this is kind of a hot topic, this nutrient matrix type research, this research is beginning to show that plant-based alternative foods don't mimic the same nutrient matrix as other foods like beef. Until now in nutrition science, our understanding of how diet impacts our health has primarily focused on nutrients like those that appear on the nutrition facts label or can be on pack on the label. And so I'm talking about calories, protein, sugar, fat, vitamins, and minerals. And this knowledge is really important to understand how these specific nutrients impact health and disease. But these nutritional components represent only a small fraction of over 26,000 different metabolites in foods. And many of these metabolites have effects on health too, but they haven't been studied as much as nutrients have. So one of the goals of this study in Van Vliet's lab was to determine the extent to which beef and these plant-based meat alternatives were similar or different, especially because their nutrition facts panels look so similar. So using a method called metabolomics, Van Vliet and his team compared the nutritional content of 18 plant-based meat alternatives to 18 ground beef patties. And again, while their nutrition facts appeared similar, there were some very important differences in the nutritional content when Van Vliet's team evaluated some of these different metabolites. So in this study, it showed that there were 22 metabolites found exclusively in beef. And these included some things that we're familiar with, that we've heard, things like DHA, omega-3 fatty acids, niacinamide, and certain antioxidants. Additionally, 51 metabolites were found to be in greater quantity in beef than as compared to the plant-based meat alternatives. And on the other hand, there were 31 metabolites found exclusively in these plant-based meat alternatives, like vitamin C and other antioxidants, that weren't found in the ground beef. So the bottom line of all of this that I'm talking about is this new emerging research is super interesting. And what it's showing is that when we look at the larger nutritional picture, factoring the full nutrient matrix of food, so beyond what is just shown on the nutrition facts panel, each of these items brings different nutritional components to the table. And high quality diets comes from a diet with a variety of foods, pairing them together with other healthy foods. So a healthy, high-quality diet includes lean proteins, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, dairy, and all of these work together to help improve and the quality of our diet and the quality of our health overall.
I want to say thank you to both of you for mentioning more than just protein, because I think protein is one of the highlight nutrients when people talk about animal products in general, and rightfully so. It has the most protein of any other food source out there for us, but you talked about iron and zinc. But I also want to mention that you were talking about a 3-ounce serving of beef, because this is the biggest thing I think I like to point out when talking about whether we're talking about the plant-based eating style or eating vegetarian or whatever, is that we don't need to be sitting down to 72-ounce steaks every night or anything like that. We're talking a 3-ounce serving of meat, or in the case of dairy, we're still talking, maybe when we're talking about cheese or yogurt, you're still talking about 6 ounces or so, and same thing like a cup of milk. But 3 ounces, for anyone who doesn't know, is about the size of a deck of cards. So I don't know if you guys have ever seen a 3-ounce serving of meat, but I know I have personally never been served a 3-ounce serving of meat. But I think that's just maybe something to consider in this is we can still eat the meat, but load up on all those fruits and veggies on the side, having that small piece of animal-based product.
Absolutely, and especially in this year when the new dietary guidelines for Americans were released, and their big takeaway message was make every bite count. And so that's really important for all of us. When we think about for our nutrition team, we like to say Real Beef and Beef Burgers, they provide a nutrient-dense and flavorful foundation where you can increase intake of other healthful foods. So for example, when building a burger, add tomato, lettuce, maybe some black beans, add some nice cheese, your favorite flavorful cheese. Make the most of that delicious, 3-ounce burger, and not the, 30-ounce mother burger that you can find on the menu.
Absolutely, that's so true. It's interesting because I was speaking just the other day to a colleague about MyPlate, for instance. There's a lot of talk just in general about how we should be plant-based in our eating or plant-forward, but really, MyPlate is very plant-based. So much of the plate are the fruits, the vegetables, the whole grains, and there's a small portion for protein in general, whether it's animal protein or vegetable protein, and then dairy. So I think for people, if they go back kind of to those basic recommendations that we've had, they still would be very plant forward in their diet. I mean, I don't know that any time in my dietetic career have I told people not to eat more fruits and vegetables. It's just something we don't do enough of. But we have to remember that there's balance in all things. We can't get everything just from the fruit and vegetable side.
Absolutely. And I was just at the Indiana State Fair the other day and standing outside of the dairy barn where you can get ice cream or grilled cheese or whatever dairy product you might like. I won't share what I got. But I saw that you were talking about the comparisons in cow's milk versus the other alternatives. And outside there was that comparison showing us the nutrients. But I was wondering about yogurt. Is there any documents or anything you have out there comparing cow's milk yogurt to the other alternative yogurts?
That's a really great question. I have not done a comparison for the public to have out there, and it sounds like maybe I should. I know that there are, I believe, 7 essential nutrients in cow's milk yogurt, but then to look and see what the difference is as far as how much protein or how much, calcium may be added, that kind of thing to them. I have not done that yet, but that's a great opportunity. I should.
I know those alternatives are really coming on the market right now, and I believe that there's some honesty and labeling discussion maybe being had in the State House on some of those things.
That's very true. It's something else. I tend to talk more to dietetic interns and other people speaking nutrition about it, understanding that there are standards of identity for certain foods. So milk is one of them. There are beef, I'm sure, has a product for that as well. There's some, fruits and vegetables, things like that, but not everything does. So ice cream, for instance, has a standard of identity that it has to be made a certain way, and you have to, people don't always recognize that the alternatives don't always have a standard, which, to your point, Monica, goes back to policy that has been discussed over the years, because the FDA, like they have standards for all this, the government does, but they don't necessarily have standards for some of those alternatives because those are newer products that came about before some of that labeling took place. So I'm sure there'll be more discussions. Obviously, that's not an area that I spend a lot of time in because that's not part of the work that I do or that we do at the Dairy Association. But at least, we just wait and see. Will they choose to add standards to that or clarify, just to make it easier for the public to be able to understand the nutritional differences between the foods. In the meantime, I need to get on a handout about yogurts to kind of help people because it's so popular. Yogurt and cheese are significantly more popular, I feel like, these days, sometimes with different groups than just fluid milk is. So that, you can get nutrition from cheese, from yogurt. You just need to know which pieces you're getting from it and how much.
So, obviously nutrition is a big component that we encourage those that we educate to think about when they're making their food choices. But as we all know, there's a lot more that comes into deciding what we put on our plate, many different factors. And when we're thinking about plant-based alternatives, we can't hardly talk about that topic without at least touching on kind of some of the controversy that comes into livestock production and the regular hits of criticism regarding sustainability or environmental footprint. I'm sure that this topic comes up in your research, training, and education that you provide. So are either of you able to speak briefly about cattle in general or within your respective industries of meat and dairy production on what that really looks like in the broad scope of things?
I can talk to it. There's a lot said in terms of the environmental impact of beef production in particular, and just livestock. But the truth is, in the United States, beef is raised more sustainably than anywhere else in the globe. The beef industry in the U.S. has made continuous improvements in their sustainability efforts, and they've improved resource use, they've reduced emissions per pound of beef produced by what I believe is more than 40%, while producing more beef per animal during, say, the last 40 years or so. So farmers and ranchers and the industry are always working to make improvements. And here in the United States, we are treated to the most sustainable and the most safe food supply across the globe. And also, I think it's really important to think about, when we think about sustainability, I think we also need to discuss nutrient density and consumption choices. So we need to be making mindful choices about the amount of food that we're consuming and wasting. And we also need to be thinking about how much, nutrition, taste, and satisfaction we're getting, in the foods that we're choosing as well. Sustainability is the issue of the day, and it is one that we will need to continue to address. But it is more than just environmental. There are other pillars to address that include dimensions like economics and, social pillars as well. And, I'm a believer that animal source foods are an important part of the discussion in good health and sustainability moving forward.
I would agree, and I appreciate the question because, as I alluded to earlier, when we were discussing before we started, I talked so much about dairy farming practices more than I ever thought as a dietitian that I would, because, just like me, I wanted to know more about where my food came from, and part of it is that sustainability piece, right? I had those same questions. And it was great to be able to finally, get answers once I was able to get closer to the science and research. Enough farm tours, speaking to veterinarians. I tell you, I now think that cows are absolutely amazing in what they do because they upcycle foods that we can't eat. And close to 80% of the foods that cows consume are foods that we can't eat as humans. So you think about the corn that we grow, right? We eat the cob and we make popcorn and all the great stuff, but there's the stalk that's left over. We can't eat that. Our stomachs don't digest that. But the cow's digestive system can, and we can feed that to cows. It's a natural source of food for them. I think about the intertwining of food groups too. So for instance, almonds. If you like to eat almonds, there's a hull that is left over after those are shelled so that we utilize that. Well, then what do we do with that? Now that's food waste, or it's going into a landfill. Like, what are we doing with those? And there's ways to recycle it, but cows can also eat that, and it's a great source of nutrition for them. And we do it in so many ways. The citrus industry, the pulp that's left over from orange juice, cows eat that, and it's a great source of food. Locally here, I live in Muncie, and there are farmers nearby that utilize fruits and vegetables that are left over from the grocery store, like the ugly fruit that we maybe didn't want to eat, instead of it just going into food waste. That is something that, animals consume. Local breweries, the remnants of making beer, where does that go? And not every animal can consume those things, but cows absolutely can. So there's a way for us to be able to be more sustainable in animal agriculture, and we have been for years. Farmers are so resilient and truly are the world's first recyclers, because they're always looking for ways to make their farm more sustainable. They have to live here too, right? They need to eat, they need to drink, they live on this planet. So it's just incredible. The more farms that I visit to see all of the technology that can be used to help make foods in general more sustainable, the recycling of water that gets used on farms so that we can save. And I can't speak to the other industries. Dairy, for instance, we have done our life cycle assessment so that we can see an LCA, for those who maybe have heard of them, to know what is our impact on the planet. And for us to be able to say in 10 years they have used 30% less water, 20% less land. That's just in 10 years alone. So, all of those farmers are looking for ways to make foods as sustainable as they possibly can. And I'm sure that dairy is not the only one doing that, right? There are lots of foods that do that. But just for everyone to understand how intertwined that we are, and that we have to work together to be able to, further our impact. And I'm just going to put a plug out here. I don't know Dr. Mitloehner, but Dr. Frank Mitloehner is an interesting speaker, and he works for UC Davis out in California. And his whole job is researching environmental sustainability and things that we can do with animal production to be more sustainable, and talking greenhouse gases. So I would definitely encourage people to reach out to their local farmer, to their local councils. So I can provide information on dairy. I am sure that Amy can provide things for beef. And there's a council for just about everything, a soil council, to be able to find out more about those products and know what their impact is and what they're doing, so that the consumer doesn't have to feel pitted one food against another.
Yeah, Hannah, you make such great points, because as consumers over time, as we've moved further away from being on farms, like we've moved far away from agriculture, so people living all over the United States, for example, don't really have a familiarity that, say, our grandparents may have with what farming practices are. And so our roles, I guess, as dietitians, and the extension is doing such a great job by helping educate people that, for example, just what Hannah was saying, the role that ruminants like cows play, because they have this unique digestive system. If you aren't in agriculture, you don't learn that. So you don't know the unique roles in the food system that cows play, that you don't know that they're eating the stalks of corn that humans can't eat. You don't know about this superpower that they have where they can upcycle some of these foods and make protein through milk and meat. But as we continue to, move away from agriculture in our everyday lives, the importance of things like extension and the roles that registered dietitians play is increasingly important in helping educate and helping consumers make good choices and answer their questions even about agriculture.
I love this conversation, and Hannah kind of said it's what got her to be a registered dietitian, and me as well. I actually grew up on a pig farm as a young child, and I was sitting at Purdue University in school. I actually started out in ag and then was like, what am I doing here? I want to go talk about food and nutrition. So I switched. But like sitting in those classes, no one around me understood farming and where their food actually came from. And we don't even have to only talk about animal food. We're talking vegetables and all of that either. So then that's what really set me on my path to get to extension, is I wanted to teach people about where our food comes from on the farm, and then how it's utilized in our body and everything. And so I was going to ask Hannah, but you already said if someone wanted to go on a farm tour, they can get in contact with probably any of the councils. There's a beef council, there's dairy council, there's pork council, and there's not only a national one, but there's typically one in each state as well. So I know Amy's not joining us from Indiana. Hannah is, but I know there's an Indiana pork board as well as the national board. She said soy as well, so there's a soybean board, that sort of thing. If people are interested in going on those tours, those organizations typically have some farmers who are willing to give tours to the public.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned it, Monica, because we have been doing virtual farm tours actually for we've been doing them for a few years, but we did them mostly for schools, like elementary schools who, field trips just aren't always a thing anymore. It's very difficult to get students to be able to take a trip to the farm. So virtual farm tours have become not only very popular for educators to be able to use for their students, but during COVID, when we just really couldn't bring people together, and certainly there's still, caution to be taken right now. There might be a lot of people who are concerned about, how a large group on a farm tour, should they be around them? But a virtual farm tour is an interesting way to be able to kind of see. And so we actually have several. We do them. We'll have 3 coming up this fall. At winnersdrinkmilk.com. You can just look on our website. We have information there, and our YouTube channel, Indiana Dairy. We have a lot of recorded ones from all over the state. So, and I know that that's become popular with many other organizations as well. So don't feel like if you can't physically go to the farm that there's not a way for you to still be able to connect with the farmer who produced the food that you're enjoying and that you want to know more about.
And for beef, I know that there is an Indiana Beef Council, and I also know to get started, if you're interested in some more virtual resources on beef production practices, sustainability, and nutrition, beefitswhatsfordinner.com has quite a few resources, including videos and kind of virtual tours too. So that's a resource readily available.
Thank you guys so much for all this information. We started talking about nutrition, and I kind of want to go back to that a little bit because as Tanya made the point with the sustainable piece we're talking about, that plays a role in what we're choosing to eat. But I always like to tell people when they're making these choices, it's all about what your goal is. And so if your goal is to eat healthier by choosing those plant alternatives, are you doing that? And I think based off of our conversation earlier, it's a big maybe. Depends on your needs. And reading that food label is going to help us. But too, Amy, that study's showing us that the food label doesn't tell us the whole story either. So there's a lot of pieces to that. But Amy, you mentioned too that you have 3 little ones at home. So that's another factor that plays into people's decisions. What else? What are some other things that are factoring in that maybe people should consider between plant alternatives and beef or dairy products?
Great question. There's just so many factors when choosing foods. In my time at school, so becoming a dietitian, probably one of the things that we learned the most about was the nutritional value to something, is how much of each nutrient is in them to help us make those choices. For instance, sometimes I get this question just with dairy about, whether or not there's enough omega-3 in, a particular type, whether it's organic or conventional. And I tell them there's not a significant difference there. Okay. As I would tell you, if you want to increase your omegas, to eat fish. It would not be. So thinking about what's in each food. But then we also talked a lot about religious practices. People's faith sometimes helps them to make certain decisions about what it is that they're going to choose for their family and for themselves. Health conscious, as you mentioned, Monica, if you are trying to reduce your cholesterol, there are going to be certain foods that are going to be better for you. If you're diabetic, for instance, there are certain foods that tend to assist with blood sugar control a little better than others as you're trying to combine your proteins and your carbohydrates and make sure that you do that throughout the day. I feel like there's so many factors, and we're so fortunate truly in this country to have such an abundance of food to choose from. I think back to when I was working in community hospitals and things like that. I might have a patient who had celiac disease and they needed a gluten-free product, and that just wasn't as common. It was more difficult for them to find something that was gluten-free, and they needed it because that was truly an allergy issue for them. It was an intolerance in their body that they would not be able to consume those products, and now they're everywhere. But it was because really of, I hate to say it, but I would call them fad diets. Just like it became popular to suddenly eat gluten-free or free of something. There's free of something on all kinds of labels, right? Free of sodium, free of everything. And that's a whole nother animal in of itself. When I see the gluten-free water, I'm like, well, there isn't any gluten in water. So, but the average person maybe doesn't know that, and that's okay. That's our job as dietitians to help them with that, but it just can be frustrating sometimes in the advertising for some of those things that it can be very misleading for consumers in that capacity. But just remembering that health is a choice. Local foods, some people want foods that are literally within 50 miles of their house, and that's fantastic, but it means you're probably not going to get avocados, right? If you live in Indiana, it's in the winter, we're not going to have tomatoes unless we canned them. So just being conscious of each other's choices, and I feel like respectful of those choices, because we all have different reasonings for the foods that we choose. And it's our role as dietitians, and for those of us like Amy and I that work for the differing checkoff councils, to provide the information to help them make decisions that are appropriate for them.
For sure. And you make such great points, Hannah. And, I was trying to think as Monica was asking the question, and as consumers, looking through my consumer lens, we are faced with so many choices. As you mentioned, Hannah, we are very blessed to be able to go to a store in our country and be able to find we have choice. Not only do we have plentiful food, but we have choices in that. So then I had to think, okay, through my mom lens, what drives me? And I guess when I look at it through my dietitian mom lens too, what I want my kids to learn is that convenience sometimes has to be the driving factor, but I want your good health to be one of your main focuses. And I believe that your good health comes from making your diet, your exercise, your sleep, your priorities. And so to me, that means I have to make the time to menu plan, purchase, and then prepare real foods. So that means it's going to take some of my time every day, and I've got to make the time for that because I think it's important. And so I want to teach my kids that, because I also want us to have that shared experience of a family meal together, like a dinner For some people, breakfast or lunch may work better. For my family, it's dinner, because I think that shared family time together around the table is really important. A meal that maybe we all contributed some preparation, thought, and maybe the thought is, hey, Mom, I really love tacos, or I really love fajitas. Can we have that on Tuesday night? And so maybe they contributed that thought, and then I put it on the menu and I purchased the foods and we helped cook it together. But I think that those things are important. So I think the driving force for me is my goal is good health. And I think having a high quality diet contributes to my good health. So I need to make the time and put it as a priority, how to plan the foods, purchase the foods, prepare the foods, so that we can have a quality meal and quality food choices in our house.
I love it. This is all such great advice. And so many things I didn't even think of there on what decisions go into our food making. But Hannah, you did mention fat content and saturated fat, I believe, specifically when you were talking about yours. And that's something we haven't really talked about today with these two products, because I think that's probably the driving force in driving people away from either dairy products or beef products, is their fat content. But just like there's an alternative that you can choose, there's lower fat options in both dairy products and beef products. We can buy skim milk, lower fat yogurts, whatever, and you can buy leaner cuts of meat. So the sirloin, those types of cuts are what's going to be better for us. As well as if you're looking at ground meat, you can buy lower fat content ground beef. But I know too, when we think about eating these products as well and having an alternative. So if I'm choosing to eat hamburger and french fries every day with a side of ice cream for dessert, this isn't really following a healthy dietary pattern anyways. So is having an alternative going to help us? Probably not, because those are still not following a healthy dietary guidelines. So trying to choose maybe some of those lower fat beef or dairy products, pork products, chicken, fish, whatever you want to consume, is going to be a better option than having a diet high in alternative ice cream or alternative hamburgers in the first place.
Absolutely. So I think sometimes people think for a plant-based burger, for example, they're like, oh, it's plant-based, I can eat that instead of vegetables. But no, you can have the plant-based burger, you can have a beef burger, but to have a healthy diet, you need to include, you need to top that burger with some veggies or serve it with a side salad, because the company it keeps is equally important. Your diet is made up of many choices, many pieces on the plate, and you've got to, maximize, in order to make every bite count, you've got to maximize each of those little positions on your plate throughout the day.
I would agree. And just thinking, considering I can appreciate, obviously we do recommend low-fat dairy products in my world. But I know there's a place for whole milk. I see children, we encourage from that 1 to 2 at least, 1 to 3 that they're drinking whole milk, because they need the fats that are in it for their brain to develop. So
and
for
fat
people
is an
to
essential
assume
nutrient, right?
yes,
So
we need fat, so it's okay to have it. But to your point, Monica, you don't want to just have like high fat everything every single day, and looking at a variety of fats, that you have in your diet, so that, yes, there's going to be some saturated fats if you're consuming animal products, but there's saturated fat in coconut. So, it's kind of like, well, it's a little either way. Coconut's a plant, but it's still a way to get it. It's not necessarily a terrible thing to have it, but I would agree, sometimes people shy away from some animal products because they have concerns about that. And I would reassure them that there is some needed in our daily diet. It's all about the portion that we choose, how often. When you're dealing with the elderly, I used to work in long-term care, their ability to consume food sometimes is more difficult as it gets harder maybe to chew and swallow, or maybe they don't have as much availability for food depending on where they live, what they like or what tastes good. So I probably would recommend a higher fat milk for them if I knew dairy was something they were still consuming, but they were not consuming, another product. Meats can be difficult, so, maybe a lean ground beef is what they choose, or if they like high-fat beef, maybe I encourage low-fat dairy and their fruits and vegetables so they get well-rounded. So there's no perfect diet or meal plan. It's all about trying to make it fit for your life and your lifestyle to be as healthy as you can be. And I'd be really remiss if I didn't mention, there are those of us that do not have enough food. And sometimes the higher fat food is what is provided for them, or something that's higher in sodium. So looking for ways for them to still be able to consume a healthy diet, and modify those foods so that they are healthier for them, or that they get enough calories needed entirely. If they don't have enough for 3 meals even a day, that could be a problem. They may need to eat higher in fat or higher in calorie just to maintain, because they don't get enough opportunity for food.
And certainly in that affordability equation, that is where sometimes animal products can be most beneficial, because they have a lot of nutrition, even the higher fat version. So say in the example of beef, maybe 80% lean ground beef is more affordable option. But, if you make burgers or tacos with that, and maybe extend it by adding some black beans and, canned black beans and tomatoes, and, you're able to get more nutrition. So it's working with what you have, and, trying to think of it through the lens of trying to provide a more satisfying, more nutrient-rich diet with what I have.
I love that you guys talked about the importance of fat too, because I think you both are familiar with Dr. Mattis, researcher at Purdue. We had him onto the podcast to talk about his research with fat and all of that. So we had a great lesson from him on the importance of fat in our diet.
All right, guys, this has been really awesome and educational. I know I have learned a few things that I did not already know. So here's kind of my recap from what I learned. If we are trying to choose what to put on our plate, it is a personal decision. Nobody can make that decision for us, but also no one can give us the answers either. We have to do the research ourselves. So if we're concerned about sustainability, are we contacting those local councils that can give us the information to help us make sure we really understand the facts? If we're concerned about nutrition, are we digging into the nutrition facts label to understand what the components of those foods are? But then also keeping in mind, as our two guests today pointed out, there's more to the nutritional composition or the nutritional profile of a food than just the carb, fat, and proteins that might be listed on a nutrition label. And so thinking about it holistically and knowing that a plant-based alternative food, a veggie burger, for example, does not give us a cop-out for not eating our vegetables, right? We still got to fill our plate with all our food groups. So the first step is to know what our goals are, research those goals to make sure that we are have all the information to make our decision. And then remember, it's the balance. And I love what you said, Amy. It's all about the company it keeps on our plate, right? I've not heard that before, but I'm going to use that one again. You can have your favorite food on your plate, but what company is it keeping? And so anything else that you would like to say before we kind of do our little fun wrap up today? Did I capture it well?
I think so. I think you did. I would definitely just put a plug out there for people, if they have questions, ask a registered dietitian. That's what we do. So looking for one, there is a whole state full of them in Indiana for sure, and across the country. So find one to be able to ask some questions, and they can surely direct you. And then obviously just in today, hopefully that they have learned that there are checkoff councils like the Dairy Council, the Beef Council, there is a pork, a soy, you name it. There's one for cotton, Christmas trees. If you want to learn about those agricultural products, go to them, and certainly using their extension. And thank you to you all at Purdue for inviting us to come and share today.
Yeah, thank you. I gotta say too, just among this group, the registered dietitians, I think we do all have a passion for sharing what we've learned. And so I certainly invite people to ask questions, because there are a lot of choices. And you know, even though it's food and we feel like we should be naturals at knowing what to do, there's a lot of choices. So please ask us questions, and please, you know, the internet is a great tool, sometimes great tool, but we have access to more information than ever before. So please, you know, in the case of beef, beefitswhatsfordinner.com is a great place to start for, you know, any information you want to have, you know, you want to get right now. I know dairy also has similar resources, and certainly the state beef councils are a great place to start for more localized information.
So let's go ahead, and I'm glad you mentioned your website, Amy. Let's go ahead and mention the best way for folks to connect with you or to learn more. So for the Beef Council, it would be www.beefitswhatsfordinner.com, that one big long phrase all strung into one word. And then for Hannah, for the Dairy Council, I have that your Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram is at INDairy, with the IN standing for Indiana. But then on YouTube, they can find you at Indiana Dairy. Is that correct?
That is correct. And our website here locally is winnersdrinkmilk.com. And then if anybody has questions in other states and regions where they're from, where they're going to, they can also connect with local dairy councils through usdairy.com. There's information there as well.
Perfect. Okay, so our final wrap up for Amy and Hannah. Two options to choose from. Either what is your favorite food, or do you have a favorite food pun?
Our family was on vacation last week, and we drove to a beach. So we were listening to Jimmy Buffett on our beach trip with my family. So I think my favorite food and my favorite food fun was were Cheeseburgers in Paradise by Jimmy Buffett. You know, I like mine with lettuce and tomato. So I'm a cheeseburger in paradise.
That's fantastic. I love it. And I know it probably just sounds funny since I work for dairy, but dairy truly is one of my favorite food groups. And I would have to go with cheese or cottage cheese. I love cottage cheese. I don't think people really appreciate it for what it could be. It goes with everything. I put it on potatoes, I put it on my salad, I mix it with fruit or salsa and chips. Cottage cheese. That's what I would eat.
Okay, so large curd or small curd?
I can go either. I usually buy small curd, but I don't like it to be too dry. I like it to be, you know, just not totally soupy, but to have a little bit there. But some people I know up in Michigan, they make it really, they like the dry stuff up there. That's okay. But
dipping Ruffles potato chips in it is the best.
Why not, right?
It has to be Ruffles, though.
It's a totally underrated food. It's that savory, creamy goodness. It's so good.
And the perfect saltiness.
Yeah.
You can, you know, it goes well with fruit, but I like the idea. I used to actually use tortilla chips and salsa a lot as a snack. So
there you have it, folks. A room full of dietitians confessing how they mix the quote-unquote healthy with the quote-unquote less than healthy to make a tasty treat that we can feel good about. It can be done. So I just want to thank you again for joining us today for this episode of Bite by Bite Nutrition for Life. Be sure to find us on Facebook and Instagram at Bite by Bite Nutrition for Life. Until next time, remember to ask questions, challenge the myths, and stay true to you.